The red skies of Pyrith Prime churned with plasma storms, their crimson lightning dancing across a horizon of obsidian spires. Below, rivers of molten lava carved winding pathways through fields of black glass, their fiery glow casting long shadows across the desolate landscape. At the center of it all stood the Palace of Inverness, a crystalline fortress that rose from the volcanic caldera like a frozen eruption, its walls pulsing with an inner fire that never dimmed. Inside those walls lived Eris Pyroth, sole heir to the Pyrothian throne and bearer of a terrible curse. For 20 years, she had existed in isolation, forbidden from touch, for anything that made contact with her skin disintegrated into ash. She stood now at her chamber window, watching as a human shuttle broke through the turbulent atmosphere, its metallic hull gleaming against the red backdrop of her world. "The envoy arrives, Your Highness," announced a servant from the doorway, careful to maintain a safe distance. "The council awaits your presence in the throne room." Oris turned, her hair writhing like living embers around her pale face. "I'll be there shortly," she replied, her voice soft but firm. The servant bowed and retreated, leaving Eris alone with her thoughts. This human envoy, this Elias Thorn, represented the first potential alliance between Pyrath and Earth. The council had insisted on her presence at the welcoming ceremony, a calculated display of power. She knew. What better way to demonstrate Pyrothian might than to showcase their princess, who could reduce matter to dust with a mere touch? She smoothed her hands over her obsidian gown, watching sparks dance between her fingers. 20 years of solitude, 20 years of being feared by her own people, 20 years of being nothing more than a weapon, a threat, a living embodiment of destruction. With a deep breath, she made her way to the throne room. Elias Thorn stood in the cavernous chamber, his human eyes wide with wonder at the vaulted ceiling of crystalline fire. The council members, 13 ancient Pyrothians draped in ceremonial robes, sat in a semicircle behind a long table of polished obsidian. At their center sat Lord Vorthak, Prime Counselor and de facto ruler of Pyrith Prime, in the absence of a crowned monarch. "Ambassador Thorn," Vorthak's voice boomed across the chamber, "we welcome you to Pyrith Prime. May your stay be illuminating." The old Pyrothian's eyes gleamed with hidden calculation. "We present to you Princess Eris Pyroth, heir to the throne of flame." All eyes turned as Eris entered, the crowd parting like a tide before her. Elias Thorn straightened his posture, a diplomatic smile fixed firmly on his face. He was taller than Eris had expected, with dark hair and eyes that held a quiet intelligence. Unlike the other humans in his delegation, who gazed at her with poorly concealed fear, Elias's expression showed only curiosity. "Princess," he said with a bow, "Earth extends its hand in friendship to Pyrith Prime." A Pyrothian envoy stepped forward, bearing a ceremonial flame-shaped offering on a hover tray. It was tradition for visiting dignitaries to present a gift to the royal family. But since Eris could touch nothing, the gift would be placed before her and later moved to the royal treasury. The envoy bowed deeply. "A token of Earth's goodwill, Your Highness." Eris nodded in acknowledgement. But as she reached out in the customary gesture of acceptance, the envoy miscalculated his position. His hand brushed against hers. There was a flash of orange light, and the envoy's hand crumbled into ash. He staggered back with a cry of pain, clutching his arm where his hand had been. Gasps rippled through the assembly. The human delegation recoiled in horror. But Elias Thorn did something entirely unexpected. He stepped forward. "Princess," he said calmly, as guards moved to intercept him. "May I?" Before anyone could stop him, he extended his hand toward Eris. Her eyes widened in alarm. "No, don't!" But Elias's fingertips had already made contact with hers. The room held its collective breath, waiting for the human envoy to disintegrate. Nothing happened. Elias's hand remained intact against hers. No ash, no disintegration, just the warm pressure of skin against skin, a sensation Eris had not experienced since childhood. The throne room erupted into chaos. "Impossible!" Vorthak's voice cut through the tumult. "Guards, separate them at once!" Pyrothian guards moved to pull Elias away, but Eris raised her free hand. "Wait!" she commanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "He's unharmed! How is this possible?" Elias looked as surprised as she was, but there was something else in his expression. A dawning realization, perhaps, or a confirmation of something long suspected. "I don't know, Princess," he said softly, "but I think we should find out." The council members exchanged dark glances. Lord Vorthak's face had gone rigid with what might have been fear. "This meeting is adjourned," he announced. "The human delegation will be escorted to their quarters while we assess this development." As guards moved to separate them, Eris caught Elias's gaze. For the first time in 20 years, someone had touched her and lived. The implications were staggering. If her curse could be broken for one human, could it be broken entirely? In that moment, everything changed. The world of ash that had defined her existence began to crumble, revealing something new and fragile beneath. Hope. The days following the incident in the throne room were a flurry of closed council sessions and hushed conversations that ceased whenever Eris entered a room. The human delegation had been sequestered in the east wing of the palace, ostensibly for their own protection, but Eris suspected it was to prevent further contact between her and Elias Thorne. She had spent those days in a state of restless anticipation, pacing her chambers and replaying the moment of contact in her mind. The warmth of his skin against hers, the absence of destruction. What did it mean? On the third day, a summons arrived. The council had decided to permit controlled interaction between her and the human envoy, under strict supervision. "They're curious," she murmured to herself as she prepared for the meeting. "As am I." The experimental chamber had been prepared in the lower levels of the palace, a stark room with observational windows along one wall, behind which council members and scientists would document every interaction. Elias was already there when she arrived, standing in the center of the room with a calm expression that belied the tension in his shoulders. "Princess Eris," he greeted her with a bow. "Ambassador Thorne," she replied, maintaining a formal distance. Guards stood at the doors, and she was acutely aware of the observers behind the glass. "I understand we are to explore the nature of your immunity." Elias nodded. "That's my understanding as well, though I confess, I'm as mystified by it as anyone." A voice came through the chamber's communication system. Lord Vorthak's. "Proceed with the initial contact test. Ambassador, approach the princess slowly." Elias took a measured step toward her, then another. When they stood an arm's length apart, he slowly extended his hand, palm up. "May I?" Eris hesitated. The memory of countless disasters flashed through her mind. The servant who had tried to brush a stray lock of hair from her face, reduced to a pile of cinders. The bird that had landed on her balcony railing, turning to ash when she reached to touch its feathers. Her mother, on the day of Eris's coronation, trying to embrace her daughter one last time. She pushed the memories away and extended her own hand. Their fingertips met, then palms pressed together. No disintegration, no pain. Just the strange, forgotten sensation of another living being's touch. "Remarkable," Elias whispered, his eyes meeting hers with wonder. The tests continued throughout the day. Handshakes, shared meals where their fingers occasionally brushed. Even a brief moment where Elias held her hand between both of his. Each contact sent waves of warmth through Eris's body. And she noticed something else. Her flame-kissed hair, which normally writhed with restless energy, seemed to settle into peaceful waves of fire in his presence. By the time the council called an end to the day's experiments, Eris felt more alive than she had in decades. As they prepared to part, Elias leaned closer to her, his voice low enough that the observers might not hear. "There's more to this than coincidence. Princess, I believe your condition is not what they've told you." Before she could ask what he meant, guards stepped forward to escort them to their respective chambers. But Elias's words echoed in her mind, long into the night. "Not what they've told you." The implication sent a chill through her, despite the perpetual heat of her body. What if her curse was not a curse at all? It was near midnight when a soft knock came at her chamber door. Eris rose from her bed, where she had been staring sleeplessly at the ceiling, and opened it to find a palace servant standing there with downcast eyes. "Ambassador Thorne requests a private audience." "Your Highness." "He says it's a matter of utmost importance." Eris hesitated. Meeting the human alone, without council supervision, would violate protocol. But curiosity burned within her, fueled by Elias's cryptic words earlier that day. "Bring him to the Solar Garden," she decided. "It will be private enough there." The Solar Garden was a vast greenhouse atop the palace's highest tower, filled with heat-loving plants from across Pyrith Prime. During the day, it captured the light of the planet's 3 suns. But at night, it was illuminated only by the gentle glow of bioluminescent fungi and the occasional flash of distant lightning through the glass ceiling. Elias arrived minutes after she did, entering the garden with cautious steps. He wore simple clothing now, having shed his formal diplomatic attire. It made him seem more approachable, more human. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," he said, joining her beside a reflecting pool filled with liquid mercury. "I needed to speak with you away from the council's eyes and ears." "What you're doing is dangerous," Eris replied. "If Lord Vorthak discovers this meeting, some risks are worth taking." Elias's gaze was steady. "Princess, what do you know about the origin of your condition?" Eris turned away, watching the mercury pool ripple with her reflection. "I was born with it. My mother died trying to hold me on my coronation day. The council says it's a manifestation of royal power, that the strongest Pyrothian rulers have always been those whose flame burned hot enough to consume." "And you believe that?" She looked at him sharply. "Why wouldn't I? I've lived with the evidence my entire life. Everything I touch turns to ash." "Except me." Elias took a step closer. "Have you ever wondered why?" "Of course I have. The council theorizes that something in human physiology neutralizes my thermokinetic energy." "The council theorizes," Elias repeated softly. "But what if they're wrong? What if they've been wrong all along?" He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, crystalline device. "This is a molecular scanner, designed to read energy signatures. With your permission, I'd like to examine the nature of your power more closely." Eris hesitated, then nodded. Elias activated the device, which emitted a soft blue light that washed over her form. He studied the readings with a frown of concentration. "Just as I suspected," he murmured. "Your thermokinetic energy isn't natural to your body. It's being channeled through you from an external source." He looked up at her. "Princess, I believe your condition isn't innate. It's artificial." "Artificial?" Eris stared at him. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone did this to you. Deliberately." The words struck her like a physical blow. "No, that's not possible. Who would—" But even as she spoke, a terrible suspicion began to form in her mind. The council, Lord Vorthak, the way they had always kept her isolated, controlled, a symbol of power, but never allowed to wield it. "There are rumors," Elias continued carefully, "of a ritual performed on the day of your coronation, a blood-binding spell that tethered your life force to the palace's thermal core, ensuring you could never touch another living being. It was said to be for your protection. But it was for control," Eris finished, her voice hollow. "They bound me to keep me from ruling in truth. I can't confirm it without evidence, Elias cautioned. But my immunity suggests the binding is specific to Pyrothian physiology. My human cells don't respond to the thermal overload trigger that causes matter to disintegrate upon contact with you. Eris turned away, her mind racing. If what Elias suggested was true, her entire life had been built on a lie. She wasn't cursed by fate, but by deliberate malice. We need to know for certain, she said at last. We need to find proof of this ritual. The palace archives might contain records, Elias suggested. Ancient texts, ritual descriptions, historical precedents. The archives are restricted. Only council members have access. A new voice spoke from the shadows of the garden. Not entirely true, Your Highness. Aris and Elias whirled to face the intruder. A scarred Pyrothian stepped into the light, older, with a face marked by old burns, and eyes that held a deep sadness. Joran, Eris breathed, you startled us. Joran had once been a royal guard, one of her mother's most trusted. After her death, he had been demoted to archival duty, a position far from power, where his loyalty to the late queen would pose no threat. Forgive the intrusion, he said with a bow. I overheard enough to know you seek the truth. I can help you access the archives. I still have the old keys. But we must move quickly. The night watch changes in 2 hours. Aris looked at Elias, who nodded once. Lead the way, Joran, she said. It's time I learned what was stolen from me. The palace archives lay deep beneath the main structure, accessible through a series of winding corridors lit by feeble thermal sconces. Joran led them with silent efficiency, navigating the labyrinthine passages as if he had walked them every day of his life, which, Eris realized, he likely had since her mother's death. The restricted section is through here, he whispered, producing an ancient key from inside his tunic. The lock clicked open, revealing a chamber filled with scrolls and crystalline data storage units that gleamed faintly in the dim light. What exactly are we looking for? Elias asked, scanning the vast collection. Records of the coronation, Eris replied. Anything about blood-binding rituals or the thermal core. They worked in silence, sifting through ancient texts and data crystals. Hours passed with little success, until Joran suddenly straightened from a dusty corner shelf. Here, he said, his voice tight with emotion. The personal journal of Councillor Merrick, dated the year of your coronation. He brought the journal to a central table, where Eris and Elias crowded around to read the spidery script. Most entries were mundane political observations. But then, they found it. A passage dated the day before Eris's coronation. Vorthak's plan is set in motion. The crimson binding ritual has been prepared in secret. Tomorrow, when the child takes the throne, her power will be channeled into the thermal core, rendering her untouchable. The council will rule through her as a figurehead, while she remains forever isolated by her curse. It is a cruel necessity, but Vorthak insists it is the only way to ensure stable governance. I have my doubts, but dare not oppose him openly. Eris's hands trembled as she read the words. They did this to me, she whispered. They stole my life. Elias placed a hand over hers, the touch still a novelty that sent warmth spreading up her arm. Can the binding be broken? Joran hesitated. There are legends of an unbinding rite, but such knowledge would be kept in the oldest archives, perhaps even in the ancient temple beneath the palace. Temple, Elias asked. Before the palace was built, this site was home to a sacred temple where the earliest Pyrothians learned to master thermokinetic form. Joran explained. The palace was constructed over it, incorporating the temple into its foundations. Few remember its existence now. Eris was about to respond when a shrill alarm cut through the silence. Red lights flashed along the corridor outside. We've been discovered, Joran hissed. The archive sensors must have detected unauthorized access. Heavy footsteps echoed down the corridor, guards approaching at a run. Elias grabbed the journal, stuffing it inside his jacket. "Is there another way out?" he demanded. Joran nodded toward a narrow passage behind a shelf. "Service tunnel. It leads to the lower levels. If we're lucky, we can reach the temple before they catch us." They slipped into the passage just as the archive door burst open, revealing Captain Katha and a squad of palace guards armed with plasma weapons. "Find them!" Katha's voice commanded. "Lord Vorthak wants them alive!" The tunnel was dark and suffocatingly hot, dropping steeply into the bowels of the palace. They moved as quickly as caution allowed, aware that any sound might betray their position to pursuers above. Eris led the way, her natural luminescence providing just enough light to navigate by. "The temple entrance should be ahead," Joran whispered. "If memory serves, there's a hidden door in the old catacombs." The tunnel eventually opened into a vast underground chamber, filled with ancient Pyrothian burial crypts. The walls were covered in glyphs, depicting beings of pure flame. Eris's ancestors, she realized, shown in their elemental form rather than solid bodies. "These pictographs," Elias murmured, studying them with fascination. "They suggest your people once existed as pure energy beings. Look here. This seems to show a transformation ritual of some kind." Eris traced the glyphs with her fingertips. "We were meant to transcend the flesh," she whispered, "not be chained by it." A distant shout echoed through the catacombs. The search parties were getting closer. "This way," Joran urged, leading them toward a section of wall carved with a spiral pattern. He pressed his palm against the center of the spiral, and the stone shifted, revealing a hidden passage beyond. "The temple lies through here. Hurry!" They slipped through the opening, which sealed itself behind them with a soft rumble of stone. The passage sloped downward, growing warmer with each step, until they emerged into a vast chamber that took Eris's breath away. The ancient temple was a massive cavern, dominated by black crystalline pillars that reached from floor to ceiling. At its center stood an altar of obsidian, beneath which glowed the molten core of Pyrith itself, a pool of liquid fire that cast writhing shadows across the chamber walls. The air shimmered with heat, and the very stone seemed to pulse with a slow, steady rhythm like a heartbeat. "The thermal core," Elias breathed, "the source of your planet's energy." "And the anchor of my binding," Eris added, feeling a strange resonance within her body as she approached the altar. Her hair flared brighter, responding to the proximity of so much raw power. A voice spoke from the shadows near one of the crystal pillars. "I have waited a long time for you to find your way here, daughter of flame." They turned to see an ancient Pyrothian emerge from the darkness. A woman so old, her skin had the texture of cooling lava, cracked and glowing from within. Her eyes were pools of liquid fire, and she moved with a grace that belied her apparent age. "Who are you?" Eris demanded. "I am Seraphine," the old woman replied. "Once advisor to your mother, now keeper of the old ways. I have guarded this temple since the day they bound you, waiting for the moment you would seek liberation." "You know about the Crimson Binding?" Elias asked. Seraphine nodded gravely. "I witnessed its casting, though I was powerless to prevent it. Vorthak and his conspirators performed the ritual while the coronation distracted the court. They used forbidden blood magic to tether Eris's life force to the thermal core, creating an imbalance that causes matter to disintegrate upon contact with her." "Can it be undone?" Eris asked, hope and fear warring in her voice. "There is an unbinding rite," Seraphine confirmed. "But it is dangerous. The binding has been part of you for 20 years. Breaking it will cause tremendous pain, and there is no guarantee you will survive the process." "I would rather die free than live another day enslaved by their lies," Eris said firmly. A distant rumble shook the chamber, explosions from above. Joran moved to the passage entrance, peering back the way they had come. "They're using plasma charges to break through the sealed doors," he reported grimly. "We don't have much time." Elias turned to Eris. Are you certain about this? There must be other ways. Diplomatic pressure. Public exposure of the Council's actions. There is no time for diplomacy. Eris cut him off. Vorthak will never surrender his power willingly. This ends now. She faced Seraphine. Tell me what I must do. The old mystic led her to the obsidian altar. Stand here, at the focus point of the thermal conduits. The human must remain beside you. His immunity will help stabilize the process. Eris took her position, with Elias standing at her right hand. His presence was reassuring, his touch on her arm a reminder of what was possible beyond her current prison. The unbinding rite requires you to channel the core's energy through your body, Seraphine explained, moving around them in a slow circle. You must find the threads of the binding spell within you and burn them away, one by one. I will guide you, but the work must be yours. She began to chant in an ancient Pyrothian dialect, her words resonating with the crystal pillars surrounding them, the chamber filled with harmonic vibrations that made the very air tremble. Eris closed her eyes, following Seraphine's instructions to reach within herself, seeking the foreign energies that had been planted there 2 decades ago. She found them, red threads of power wrapped around her life force like parasitic vines, their roots extending deep into the thermal core below. I see it, she whispered. The binding. Now, Seraphine instructed. Draw power from the core. Use it to burn away the threads. Eris opened herself to the molten heart of her world, feeling its power surge into her with staggering force. Her body began to glow from within, skin turning translucent as the energy built to dangerous levels. She directed it toward the binding threads, and agony exploded through every cell. Her scream echoed through the temple as her form flickered between solid matter and pure energy. The pain was beyond anything she had imagined possible, like being torn apart and remade simultaneously. Elias gripped her hand tightly. I'm here, he said, his own skin reddening from the heat she was generating. Stay with me, Eris. Focus. Through a haze of pain, she felt his touch anchoring her, preventing her thermokinetic waves from dissipating. She clung to that connection as she continued the painstaking work of burning away the binding, thread by crimson thread. The chamber shook violently. A section of wall exploded inward, showering the temple floor with debris. Captain Katha stood in the newly created breach, flanked by plasma-armed mercenaries. Behind them came Lord Vorthak, his ancient face contorted with rage. Stop this madness at once, he commanded. Step away from the altar. Joran positioned himself between the intruders and the altar. You'll have to go through me first, traitor. Katha raised her weapon. Gladly. Plasma fire erupted across the chamber. Joran dove for cover behind a crystal pillar, returning fire with a small sidearm he had concealed within his tunic. Seraphine continued her chant, raising a shimmering barrier of thermal energy around the altar to protect Eris and Elias. Don't stop, Elias urged, his face streaked with sweat from the intense heat. You're almost there. I can feel the binding weakening. Eris pushed harder, channeling more power from the core. Her body now alternated rapidly between solid form and pure flame, the transition points excruciating as her very molecules reconfigured themselves. She could sense the binding unraveling, its grip on her loosening with each thread she destroyed. Vorthak shouted orders to his mercenaries. Target the thermal conduits. If we destabilize the core, the ritual will fail. Plasma bolts struck the crystal pillars, sending fractures racing through their structures. The temple's harmonic resonance faltered, disrupting Seraphine's protective barrier. Katha seized the opportunity, charging toward the altar with her weapon raised. Surrender, princess, or I'll end this right now. Elias released Eris's hand and threw himself into Katha's path. No! The captain's plasma bolt struck him square in the chest, sending him crashing to the temple floor. Eris's focus shattered at the sight of Elias falling. With a cry of rage and despair, she abandoned the careful dissolution of the binding and instead poured all her power into a single, devastating surge. "Eris, no!" Seraphine shouted. "The binding must be undone precisely or—" But it was too late. Eris's power exploded outward in a blinding conflagration. The binding shattered all at once, releasing 2 decades of suppressed thermokinetic energy in a cataclysmic wave that rippled through the temple. The crystal pillars absorbed the blast, channeling it into the planet's network of thermal conduits. For a terrible moment, everything went still. Then, Eris screamed as her body fully transformed into pure flame, not just her outer form, but her entire being converting to elemental energy. She hovered above the altar, a being of living fire, as waves of harmonic resonance spread from the temple across all of Pyrith Prime. Every Pyrothian on the planet felt it, a sudden awakening of latent thermokinetic potential, a reconnection to ancient abilities long suppressed by the Council's rule. In that moment, each citizen sensed their bond with the throne restored, felt the rightful sovereign reclaiming her power. In the temple, Katha's weapon failed, its energy cells depleted by proximity to Eris's pure form. Vorthak staggered back, his face ashen as he witnessed the full manifestation of the power he had tried to contain. "What have you done?" he whispered. Eris's voice resonated from her flame form, echoing with newfound authority. "I have reclaimed what you stole from me, Vorthak, from all of us." With a gesture, she sent tendrils of controlled fire to envelop the Prime Counselor, lifting him from the ground. "For 20 years, you kept me isolated. You let me believe I was cursed, that my touch brought only destruction. You turned my people against me through fear. It was necessary." Vorthak gasped, struggling against the fiery bonds. "The old ways were chaotic. Elemental transformation would have destabilized our society. Structure and control were needed." "Not your kind of control," Eris replied. She lowered him to the ground, but maintained the restraints. "You and your conspirators will answer for your crimes. But first—" She turned her attention to Elias, who lay motionless on the temple floor. Transforming back to solid form, a process she now controlled with ease, she knelt beside him, cradling his head. "Elias," she whispered, her voice breaking, "please don't leave me now." To her immense relief, his eyes fluttered open. "Did it work?" he asked weakly. "Yes," she said, tears turning to steam as they fell from her eyes. "I'm free. We're all free." Above them, the temple trembled as palace guardians loyal to the old traditions arrived, summoned by the awakening of Pyrothian energy across the planet. They seized Vorthak and his mercenaries, their expressions grim but determined. Captain Katha stood alone, her weapon discarded, facing a choice that would define her future. "What now, Princess?" she asked. "Exile for all who serve the Council?" Eris rose to her feet, helping Elias stand beside her. "No, Pyreth needs unity, not further division. Those who renounce the Council's deception and pledge loyalty to the true throne will have a place in our new order." She fixed Katha with a steady gaze. "Which will you choose, Captain, exile or service?" Katha hesitated only briefly before kneeling. "I serve the throne, Your Majesty. Always have, even when I did not know it was corrupted." As dawn broke over Pyrith Prime, news of the night's events spread rapidly through the capital and beyond. The plasma storms that had raged for decades began to calm, responding to the restored balance of thermokinetic energy. Citizens emerged from their homes to witness a sky clearer than any in living memory, where the 3 suns of Pyrath could be seen rising in perfect alignment, a cosmic sign that, according to ancient legend, heralded the ascension of a true sovereign. 3 days later, as the suns set in a fiery triad, Eris Pyroth stood on a throne forged from cooled lava and crystalline flame, facing her assembled people. The coronation ceremony took place in the central plaza of the capital, where all could witness the crowning of their new queen. Elias Thorne stood at her right hand, his diplomatic status now elevated to royal consort, a position created to honor both his role in Eris's liberation and the new alliance between Pyrith and Earth. His recovery from Catha's plasma blast had been swift, aided by Pyrothian healing techniques and his own remarkable resilience. Lord Vorthak, stripped of titles and power, watched from a secured viewing platform, his face a mask of bitter resignation. He would be exiled to the outer territories of Pyreth, far from the capital and any chance of political influence. Captain Catha, now commander of the reformed palace guard, stood at attention as Eris rose to address her people. "Citizens of Pyreth," the new queen began, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "For too long, we have lived in fear of our own powers, of each other, of change. The crimson binding that held me captive also suppressed the true potential of our race. Today, we reclaim our heritage." She raised her hands, transforming them into pure flame before the astonished audience. "We are beings of fire and stone, capable of transcending the limitations of physical form. This gift is not a curse to be feared, but a power to be embraced with wisdom and responsibility." Elias stepped forward to stand beside her. "And we are not alone in the universe. Earth extends its hand in true alliance, not with a figurehead, but with a sovereign queen who represents the full potential of Pyrothian culture." The crowd erupted in cheers, many citizens experimentally manifesting small flames in their own palms, the first stirrings of abilities long dormant. As night fell, Eris and Elias stood on the palace balcony, watching the celebration continue in the city below. Fireworks, both technological and thermokinetic, illuminated the sky, painting the capital in hues of gold and crimson. "What happens now?" Elias asked, his hand entwined with hers. Aris smiled, her hair forming a gentle corona of flame around her face. "We rebuild. We learn. We grow." She turned to face him. "The Council suppressed knowledge of our true nature for generations. There is so much we need to rediscover about ourselves." "And what about us?" Elias's question was soft, tentative. In answer, Eris leaned forward and kissed him, a gesture that would have been unthinkable days before. "You are the only being in the universe who could touch me when everyone else turned to ash. I think that makes you rather special." Ambassador Thorne. "Special enough to stay?" he asked, his arms encircling her waist. "For as long as you wish," she replied. "Pyrith has much to offer Earth, and I suspect Earth has much to teach us in return." "A true alliance, then?" "The strongest kind," Eris agreed, resting her head against his shoulder as they watched the celebration below. In the years that followed, Pyrith Prime underwent a transformation as dramatic as Eris's own. Under her guidance, the government evolved from an autocratic council to a meritocratic technocracy built on principles of open cooperation and shared knowledge. The ancient temples were restored, becoming centers for the study and mastery of thermokinetic abilities. Elias remained at her side, first as consort, later as husband and co-ruler. Their union produced children who inherited aspects of both worlds, hair that flickered with subdued embers, and skin that could withstand extreme temperatures while maintaining human appearance. Together, Eris and Elias founded the Pyrothian Human Council for Thermokinetic Studies, an institution dedicated to fostering cultural exchange, scientific breakthroughs, and practical applications of thermal energy throughout known space. Their work led to revolutionary advances in sustainable power generation and more efficient warp travel, drawing attention from neighboring star systems. Captain Catha rose to become Supreme Commander of the Pyrothian Defense Forces, her loyalty to the throne never again wavering. Under her leadership, Pyrath's military transformed from an instrument of fear to a peacekeeping force respected across the galaxy. Joran served as royal historian, ensuring that the truth of Pyrath's past would never again be lost or suppressed. His meticulous records became the foundation for a new educational system that taught young Pyrothians about their heritage and abilities. Seraphine lived out her final years as an honored advisor to the throne, training a new generation of mystics in the ancient rituals and wisdom she had preserved. When she eventually passed into pure energy form, the traditional end-of-life transformation for elder Pyrothians, her essence joined the thermal core, becoming part of the planet's living energy. Lord Vorthak, in his exile, penned extensive memoirs detailing the Council's rise to power and the implementation of the Crimson Binding. While never forgiven for his actions, his writings provided valuable insights into the psychology of control and the dangers of suppressing cultural identity for political gain. 25 years after her liberation, Queen Eris sat in her private chambers, composing a letter to Elias, who was away on a diplomatic mission to a newly discovered star system. Their children were grown now, with the eldest daughter serving as ambassador to Earth, and their son showing promising talent in thermokinetic engineering. "My beloved," she wrote, her pen leaving trails of faint ember marks on the heat-resistant paper. "As I reflect on the anniversary of our meeting, I am struck by how completely one moment can change the course of history. When you first touched my hand in the throne room that day, you did more than survive my curse. You began its unraveling." She paused, gazing out at the transformed skyline of the capital, where crystal spires now housed research facilities and cultural centers rather than instruments of oppression. "Everything I touched once turned to ash," she continued. "But you taught me that true power ignites life, not death. Together, we have kindled a flame that spreads not destruction, but illumination. May it burn eternal, like my love for you." As she sealed the letter, Eris allowed her hand to transform briefly into pure flame, a simple act that still filled her with wonder and gratitude. The binding that had imprisoned her had also hidden her true potential, just as Pyrath's suppressed history had concealed the full capabilities of her people. Now, both she and her world existed in a state of balanced duality, capable of solid form or pure energy, traditional stability or radical transformation, separate identity or universal connection. It was not always an easy balance to maintain, but it was a true one, forged in the fire of liberation and tempered by wisdom hard-won. Outside her window, the three sons of Pyrath began their evening alignment, casting long shadows across a landscape no longer dominated by fear. In their light, Eris saw not an ending, but an endless beginning, for herself, for Elias, for their children, and for all those who would come after, hands extended toward a future where nothing and no one would be reduced to ash.